Yeas are, on this vote, the yeas are 237, the nays are 188. The resolution, or the previous question, is ordered. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. Gentleman from New York. The yeas and nays are ordered. Requested. Those in favor of vote by yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
And this is the rule vote for the continuing resolution. This is the bill that would continue federal spending from the beginning of the new fiscal year. That'd be October 1st, next weekend, through November the 18th. There's a 5-minute vote on the rule, and the rule would allow for an hour of general debate. And the bill itself provides $3.5 billion of disaster relief. About $1.5 billion of that would be offset with cuts or changes elsewhere. And we spoke just a short while ago to a Capitol Hill reporter on how that issue will play out as the CR continues on the House floor and goes to the Senate floor later this week as well. Humberto Sanchez with Roll Call has been covering the CR debate today in the House. First of all, on this disaster relief point, House Republicans have decided to offset about $1.5 billion of that. Why did they make that decision?
Well, they want to draw a line in the sand to remind everyone that their mission this Congress is to cut spending. They believe that emergency spending has been abused in the past, that it's been used for profligate spending, and they want to kind of set a precedent that you can offset some of it, and the sky won't fall, and actually do some good to try to reduce the deficit.
Well, if House Democrats vote against the bill in part because of those offsets, what are the options for House Republican leaders for getting the bill passed?
They will. They're whipping their own caucus very hard at the moment to try to get the votes they need. They're facing a couple of things. They're facing issues with the offset from the Democrats, but they're also facing from within their own caucus some conservative members who are upset that the bill spends more than the Ryan budget that was passed earlier this year, and so they're right now working very hard to cobble together the right mix of votes to get to 218.
Well, what are you hearing on the Democratic side about, in the end, how many Democrats might support the CR itself when it comes up for a vote later?
I've heard some speculation that there could be roughly 10, maybe more, but again, that's all speculation at this time. The minority whip, Steny Hoyer, is also pushing very hard in his caucus to oppose the bill.
But the issue of disaster aid doesn't end here in the House. The Senate leader, Harry Reid, has said he plans to get the Senate to pass a bill with nearly $7 billion in disaster aid as an amendment to the House CR. None of that, allegedly, will be offset. Does he have the votes to pass it there in the Senate?
It's not clear that he does. He passed that bill last week with 10 Republicans voting with him. He is now. They are now saying several of those have broken away. There's three so far that have said that they would vote for it. Of the 10, 2 have said for sure they'll vote against it, and the rest are undecided. And right now, Senator Reid is also working to try to shore up support on that side as well.
As we wrap up here, give us what it looks like going through the rest of the week, assuming we're looking at passage, say it passes here in the House, what's ahead in the Senate, and eventually how does this get passed by both bodies in the same form?
Well, I think that the Senate faces, if it passes the House, the Senate faces a choice to try to amend it. If it's not, if they can't change it, they may have to pass it, the House version, in order to ensure the government stays open and that some disaster funding gets through. So the options aren't really good for the House, for the Senate, if the House passes it, and if they do not have the votes to amend it.
Humberto Sanchez covering the CR debate in the House for Roll Call. Thanks for the update.
Thank you so much.
We're going to open up our phone lines now. And the House is voting on the rule for the CR. The rule, if it passes, will allow for an hour of general debate, no amendments. 2 more 5-minute votes will follow this vote.
The nays are 185. The resolution is adopted, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is a vote on the motion from the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, to suspend the rules and agree to ESCON Resolution 28, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 28. Concurrent resolution authorizing the use of Emancipation Hall in the Capitol Visitor Center for an event to award the Congressional Gold Medal collectively to the 100th Infantry Battalion, 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and the Military Intelligence Service, United States Army, in recognition of their dedicated service during World War II.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the concurrent resolution? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
This one and one other suspension bill vote, and that will do it for recorded votes, at least in this series of votes. And the House will move on to an hour of general debate on the continuing resolution, temporary government spending from October 1st through November the 18th. Over in the Senate today, they've mainly been working on a bill dealing with foreign trade. Had several amendment votes earlier today related to trade adjustment assistance. That's the expired program, the program that would help provide U.S. workers with assistance with those workers who lose their jobs due to increased foreign competition. The Senate is in, and you can follow the Senate on C-SPAN 2. On C-SPAN 3 at this hour, a hearing looking into Google and their competitive position in the marketplace. A Senate hearing underway. You can follow that on C-SPAN 3. Tomorrow on C-SPAN 3, we'll have a hearing from the Joint Committee on Deficit Reduction. They come in at 10 o'clock Eastern, and you can follow that live on C-SPAN 3.
Mr. McIntyre voted aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster votes aye. Mr. Posey. Mr. Posey votes aye. Ms. Wilson of Florida. Ms. Wilson of Florida votes aye. Ms. Waters. Ms. Waters votes aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 424, the nays are 0, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended and the concurrent resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion reconsidered is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, to suspend the rules and pass S-846, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 846, an act to designate the United States Courthouse located at 80 Lafayette Street in Jefferson City, Missouri, as the Christopher S. Bond United States Courthouse.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? All those in favor, correction, the members will record their votes by electronic devices. It will be a 5-minute vote. Sorry.
The last vote in this series, the House is voting on concurring with the Senate bill naming a courthouse in the United States Courthouse in Jefferson City, Missouri, after Senator Kit Bond, who served in the U.S. Senate from 1987 through 2011, 4 terms. He also served twice as Missouri's governor. The measure sponsored by former House member and now current Senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt. Following this, the House will move on to an hour of general debate on the continuing resolution. Because the Congress has not finished work on 2012 spending, the CR would continue funding for the federal government from October 1st through November the 18th, 2011. In the U.S. Senate, Harry Reid plans to add $6.9 billion in disaster relief spending. There is $3.6 billion attached to the House version of the continuing resolution. About $1.5 billion of that is offset with spending cuts.
2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. House will be in order. House will be in order. House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks on and include extraneous material on H.R. 2608.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 405, I call up the bill H.R. 2608 with a Senate amendment thereto and have a motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the title of the bill, designate the Senate amendment, and designate the motion.
H.R. 2608, an act to provide for an additional temporary extension of programs under the Small Business Act and the Small Business Investment Act of 1958 and for other purposes. Senate amendment. Mr. Rogers of Kentucky moves that the House concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 2608 with an amendment.
Pursuant to House Resolution 405, the motion will be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations. The gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Rogers, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Dix, each will control 30 minutes. House will be in order. House will be in order. Members, please take their conversations off the floor. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to bring to the floor the continuing appropriations resolution to keep the federal government operating until November 18th of this year. For procedural reasons, this is being done as an amendment to the Senate amendment to H.R. 2608 to speed passage through the Senate at their request. But in substance, this is the same as the continuing resolution, H.J. Res. 79, that I introduced on September 14th. This CR, Mr. Speaker, will give Congress the time needed to complete fiscal year 2012 appropriations and adequately fund vital government programs and services while working to put federal spending on a more sustainable course. Just as significantly, this bill provides desperately needed funding for disaster recovery and relief. I would have preferred to complete the appropriations process in regular order, and I believe the House made great strides in doing so. The Appropriations Committee moved on 11 of the 12 annual appropriations bills, and 6 bills have cleared the House. But we still need time to collaborate with our colleagues in the Senate in order to complete this work, and a short-term bill will allow us to do so. As we saw last year and into the spring, the threat of a government shutdown causes dangerous economic instability. And at this precarious time, we need to bolster the American public confidence that their representatives in Washington are working for them and not let politics come before people. The CR continues government operations at a rate of $1.043 trillion. The total amount agreed to by the Congress and the White House in the Budget Control Act. It's clean of most policy provisions to ensure swift passage, but we've provided small changes for safety, security, and continuity of essential programs. For instance, we've extended federal flood insurance availability and the availability of defense survival equipment for our troops abroad. In addition, this CR will help meet the needs of the thousands of families, businesses, and communities burdened by recent natural disasters by providing an immediate $1 billion in emergency 2011 funding now, as well as an additional $2.65 billion for the next year. We're helping our citizens get back on their feet. The $776 million in the bill for the FEMA Disaster Relief Fund, which is $276 million more than the President or the Senate proposed, is time-sensitive and critical. That fund is now below $250 million and is running out of money fast. Unless we provide additional funding within a matter of days, the Disaster Relief Fund will soon be empty, leaving millions of people in the lurch. The $1 billion in emergency funding for fiscal year 2011 has been offset by a cut to the Department of Energy's Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Loan Program, which has more than $4 billion in unspent idle funds in the pipeline. It's been there for 3 years. Now is the time to use those idle dollars for true and immediate purposes, aiding our fellow citizens in their times of greatest need as they cope with the aftermath of wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes, and hurricanes, an unprecedented string of disasters in this country. Now, the notion of offsetting emergency spending has gotten a lot of attention as of late. Let me be very clear. Offsetting emergency spending is not a unique practice. In fact, over the last 10 years, the Congress has used offsets in at least 15 of 30 emergency supplemental spending bills, half of them. In total, the Congress has passed over $60 billion in emergency offsets in the last 10 years, most of which had a large amount of support on both sides of the aisle, including the support of our former Speaker, Pelosi. The loan program used as an offset in this bill has had excess funds for years, and taking the money will not negatively affect that program. All entities in final loan stages will still get the funding they've worked for. Furthermore, this offset is identical to the one already passed by the House in June as part of the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. We've already voted for it. In addition, the committee will continue to consider disaster funding over the next few weeks as we bring the fiscal year 2012 appropriations process to a close, hopefully by November the 18th, including reviewing estimates that are still coming in from recent disasters so that families and communities can get the assistance they need while making sure that every dollar is well spent. The Budget Control Act, which both houses in Congress and the White House agreed to, provides for 2012 disaster funding in that capacity. But with respect to this continuing resolution, at this time, we do not have all of the necessary information on the cost of the recent disasters, nor the time to work out a final comprehensive agreement with the White House and the Senate. As members of this body know, back in their home districts, the FEMA administration works to survey the damage and report that to the White House, who in turn makes a request to Congress for disaster funds. That's the normal procedure in which we're involved now, and I assure the members that as we get those estimates from the White House in the next few weeks and months, they will be addressed and monies will be available. Therefore, we must meet the most immediate need and provide additional funding now for FEMA to keep that program going for the next several months. That's what this continuing resolution does, and why we, the House and Senate, have to pass this bill immediately. This CR lives up to the guidelines set in the Budget Control Act, as well as our commitment to responsible and reduced levels of spending. We can right our fiscal ship while still supporting essential government programs and services and disaster aid. And with this in mind, it is my intention that Congress complete the fiscal year 12 appropriations work without any further delay. And the sooner we pass this CR, the sooner we can focus on long-term appropriations legislation and get it done before November 18th. So I urge my colleagues in both chambers to support this bill so we can send it to the President as soon as possible. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington.
Madam Speaker, I rise in reluctant opposition to the continuing resolution. For the most part, it is a clean CR. It provides funding at $1.043 trillion through November 18th. The amount reflects the Budget Control Act cap on FY 2012 appropriations. The CR continues funding as provided in FY 2011 with a 1.503 across-the-board cut to come down from approximately 159 to 1043. The CR adds a handful of anomalies requested by the administration through OMB, including provisions to cut back on overseas contingency operation funds from the level of 11 down to the level that was passed in the Defense Appropriations Bill, which is approximately 118. Authorize DHS work on national special security events, extend flood assurance, and delay the Postal Service payment obligation. The last provision will allow mail service to continue while Congress pursues legislative reforms. The matter that concerns me and the Democratic caucus is the way the majority has provided disaster relief funding. FEMA's disaster relief fund is precariously short on money in FY 2011. Americans are trying to rebuild their lives after the devastating effect of floods, wildfires, and hurricanes in a record year of natural disasters, and FEMA is running out of resources to help them. FEMA has deferred funding for all long-term rebuilding projects to focus on immediate needs. The administration requested a $500 million supplemental appropriation for the remaining days in the fiscal year. They requested 2011 emergency funds. They did not recommend an offset. This has been the practice for supplemental disaster relief. Since 2002, Congress appropriated $95 billion in supplemental disaster relief. All of it was designated as an emergency, and none of it was offset. Some other emergencies may have been paid for during the Clinton administration. However, during the Bush administration, this was not so for disaster relief. Now, there were other categories of emergency spending and other supplementals that were offset, but not disaster relief. For fiscal year 2002 through 2006, President Bush requested supplemental disaster relief funding 8 times. Each of the 8 times was designated as an emergency, and none were offset. With Republicans in the majority, some of the Bush emergency disaster relief bills without offsets were approved by voice vote, and some were considered under unanimous consent. Nonetheless, House Republicans today insist on departing from this practice. They take $1.5 billion from the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program at the Department of Energy to pay for $1 billion in disaster and emergency relief. We have discussed compromise with the other side. They have been unwilling to accept our suggestions. The Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program was started in 2008 to reinvigorate American manufacturing. To date, this program has awarded $3.5 billion of credit subsidy to promote energy-efficient advanced vehicles and their component parts. The Department of Energy estimates that loan guarantees have created or maintained in total 39,000 jobs in California, Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, and Tennessee. Some have suggested that this program has been slow to spend emergency funding provided in the FY 2009 CR. I say the loan review process is and ought to be strenuous. One company, Tesla, originally applied under a different loan program in 2006 and received an ATVM loan in 2010. It required 4 years of due diligence to review to qualify for the loan. And having read many of the press releases that went out when there was another DOE program that was not that ran into difficulties, I didn't note anybody there saying we shouldn't take time for due diligence. Due diligence is required. By the way, the company in question, Tesla, employed about 400 workers before receiving the loan. Today, they have 1,400 employees in the fields of engineering, research and development, design, manufacturing, assembly, maintenance, service, sales, and support. The ATVM program has an additional 18 loan applications in progress that are projected to create 50,000 to 60,000 more jobs in total in California, Florida, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio. One pending application would support investments at 11 plants in Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. The company employs over 56,000 workers, and they're adding nearly 9,000 new workers since 2009. Some of the jobs will be at risk by using this offset. This is not the time to put American manufacturing jobs at risk. If you want to make it in America, you can't take away this funding. And if there's one thing we've learned on the economic forefront is that we need a growth policy. We don't need a cut policy. Cut and grow just ain't so. And I would point out that we need to get people back to work. And the way you do that is programs like this that are going to hire people instead of fire people. We have been doing a lot of firing and it hasn't worked. When are we going to wake up? When is the majority party going to realize that we've got to do something to create growth and stimulate the economy and put people back to work? The only way we're going to get the deficit down is to bring unemployment down. This is an employment program. It should be supported. We should defeat the continuing resolution and come up with either take this out or come up with another offset that doesn't hurt job creation in our country. I reserve my balance.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield myself 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
The gentleman mentioned in his statement that we had not used offsets to fund disaster relief. I beg to differ. In 2000, 2001, emergency supplemental, offset. 2002, emergency supplemental, offset. 2004,
They're not disaster.
disaster relief for wildfire and others, offset. In 2005, offset for relief for the tsunami. In 2006, relief for Katrina, offset. In 2008, disaster relief and recovery, $20 million in offsets, and I could go on. There are many times where we have used the offsets to pay for supplementals. In fact, over the last 10 years, 15 of the 30 emergency spending bills and supplementals were offset for a total of $60 billion over the last 10 years. Now, on this offset that has been mentioned, over $4 billion sits idle in that account and has so for 3 years now, as the administration has been slow to obligate that money. The $1.5 billion rescission in subsidies we propose will not have a significant impact on the program. This is the same rescission, Madam Speaker, that we used in the fiscal 12 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill that passed this House with bipartisan support in June. Exactly the same. And yet the Senate didn't act, and that $1 billion was not available for disaster relief. States with applications in the queue in this program, like Indiana, Louisiana, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, Missouri, California, and many others, will still receive their due diligence just like before and could receive awards as well. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina.
Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 4 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the fact that we're even debating the substance of this continuing resolution is a telling statement about the priorities of the current House majority. FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, after all, is operating on fumes. Since late August, the agency has deferred funding for all long-term rebuilding projects in order to have enough resources to meet the most pressing emergency needs. This means that critical rebuilding efforts in over 40 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Florida, Iowa, North Dakota, Tennessee, Missouri, Alabama, my own state of North Carolina, and others, are on hold. Thousands of people who would currently be earning a good paycheck by working on rebuilding efforts are not. And communities that are still recovering from past disasters are being told to move to the back of the line to make way for those affected by the more recent disasters. Madam Speaker, this Congress has a responsibility to make good on our promise to these communities by ensuring that FEMA has enough resources to respond to all major disasters. Regardless of where and when they occurred, we must not pit one state or one region against the other. The administration has made clear what it will take: a $500 million supplemental appropriations for the remainder of this fiscal year and an increase of $4.6 billion above its initial request for fiscal year 2012. This CR includes $1 billion in supplemental fiscal 2011 funding and a $2.65 billion down payment toward fiscal 2012. But I'm not satisfied with either the amount or with the price of inclusion. Since 2002, Congress has appropriated $95 billion in supplemental funding for the Disaster Relief Fund and additional disaster funding for the Corps of Engineers. Those are the two accounts we're talking about here. And that has all been designated as an emergency, and none of it offset. Now, at a time when communities up and down the eastern seaboard are still reeling from the aftermath of Hurricane Irene, at a time when millions of Americans are still struggling to find a good job, House Republicans are telling us this time around FEMA won't get any more disaster relief funding for the current year until or unless we take money from another federal agency. This is a radical departure from the way in which both parties have treated emergency disaster relief over the past decade, and it will undermine our economic recovery. The Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing Program, which our Republican colleagues propose to cannibalize, that program stands to add tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in an industry that will be critical to our future economic competitiveness. This is a bad precedent, and it's bad policy. It's no wonder the American people are fed up with Congress. Once again, the majority is putting partisan ideology ahead of the dire needs of the American people by telling our communities they won't get relief until we wage yet another budget battle here in Congress. I urge my colleagues to oppose this approach and instead support the disaster relief measure approved by the Senate, which would fully fund FEMA's needs without requiring yet another fight over spending offsets. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Kentucky.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Aderholt, who's the chair of the House Appropriations Committee on Homeland Security.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 3 minutes.
I want to thank the distinguished chairman of the full Appropriations Committee for yielding, and Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this must-pass resolution. Not only does this CR provide the necessary funds and the authority to keep the government open, it also provides an immediate and a substantial infusion of vital funding to both FEMA's disaster relief efforts and the Corps of Engineers Flood Control and Coastal Emergency Account. And it does all of this in a fiscally responsible way. This resolution before us today complies with the recently enacted Budget Control Act and provides the Appropriations Committee of the House and Senate ample time to do our work on the FY12 budget. And for the hard-hitting communities all across the country, including my home state of Alabama, which was hit hard back in April, and it's additional to those that were devastated by fires, by floods, tornadoes, hurricanes over the past 5 months, this CR will sustain FEMA's disaster relief and recovery efforts and help the Corps with additional funding for emergency flood control projects. As I mentioned, my home state of Alabama was hit hard back in April, on April 27th. So if anyone is interested in sustaining FEMA's disaster relief, it would be me. And I do believe that this bill does the job in just that. The duration of this CR will provide the time to review and scrutinize FEMA's preliminary damage estimates for the Hurricane Irene, estimates that are based on historical projections rather than actual data and claims that are still in process of being collected. This oversight will enable the Appropriations Committee the time to properly and responsibly address the administration's full supplemental request, a request that was submitted to Congress only about 2 weeks ago. And while Congress has an undeniable obligation to thoroughly address our nation's disaster relief needs, we can no longer afford to simply throw money at calamities and then ask the hard questions later on. We have to get our funding priorities right the first time, and that's exactly what both Chairman Rogers and I have repeatedly said when it's come to appropriations for Homeland Security. Madam Speaker, this CR is the right tool for the right time, and I urge my colleagues to support this vital resolution and responsibly address our nation's most pressing needs. I thank the gentleman for yielding. Yes, I yield. I yield.
Now, the gentleman chairs the Homeland Security Appropriations Subcommittee, which funds FEMA.
Exactly.
Now, you passed a bill back in June that provided $1 billion for FEMA for disaster relief. Is that right?
We passed that.
And what happened to that bill?
It passed the committee.
I mean, after it passed the House.
And it passed the House and was sent to the Senate.
And what happened then?
And that's where it's sitting.
Nothing has taken place in the Senate since June?
Absolutely.
And your bill would have provided $1 billion today for disaster relief, and the other body hasn't acted?
We did that, back, as you say, back well before June. It passed the House on June, and it sits over there even today.
No wonder they're operating on fumes.
Gentleman from Washington.
Talking about FEMA.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield 4 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Viskoski, the ranking member of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee.
Gentleman from Indiana is recognized for 4 minutes.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding, and I rise to oppose the taking of the $1.5 billion from the Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturing account to offset a portion of the Army Corps disaster needs estimated to be $2,256 million instead of declaring this matter an emergency. I do think as a matter of policy, this institution and the Congress as a whole needs to have the intestinal fortitude to understand that we have natural disasters every year, and we need to set aside monies to fund those and not to take money out of investment accounts that create jobs in the United States of America. We have two problems that we're discussing today. One is a natural problem. We have had tornadoes, we have had floods, we have had hurricanes, we had an earthquake, we've had wildfires. So what is new? The fact is, in every year, save two, since 1997, the Congress has recognized the need for emergency funds to respond to the impacts of natural disasters on our nation's water resources infrastructure. Since 2001, the Congress has provided more than $24 billion in emergency funds to the Army Corps of Engineers for this very purpose. And according to the Corps of Engineers, we have spent $5.12 billion on an emergency basis in Afghanistan and Iraq on economic infrastructures. Now, some suggest all of this has to be offset because we have a fiscal crisis. I would point out that those emergency declarations for water emergencies in 1998 occurred, and the budget of the United States was balanced. There was an emergency declaration as far as those water projects in 1999, and we had a balanced budget. There was not an emergency declaration in 2000, and we balanced the budget. In 2001, we had an emergency declaration for water disasters, and we balanced the budget. That's not an argument not to meet the human crisis that people are facing in this country. I certainly think that my colleague from Washington covered the account as far as vehicle manufacturing very well, and the investment it represents and the jobs maintained and created that are represented again in this account. And certainly Chairman Rogers makes a point, rightfully so, that many of these dollars have now been allocated to specific loan programs, and others, 8 specifically, will be resolved by the end of this year, and again, this offset would not impact those, and the Chairman is absolutely correct. However, I do point out to my colleagues that there remain 10 projects in the stage of due diligence, the same words that my colleague from Washington used, to complete for the remainder of this $1.5 billion, with approximately 10,000 jobs at stake. When I started my remarks...
Gentleman yield. Isn't it true that the industrial states are the ones that are getting most of this money, because that's where the automobile industry has, over the years, been located?
The gentleman is correct, but I would broaden that to suggest the United States of America is getting that money, and people who want to make things in the United States of America and manufacture things in the United States of America are getting that money.
Isn't it true that we already know this program works? This program received $7.5 billion, and $3.5 billion of it has been spent and has been obligated and is out there as loans. I think it tripled under the loan guarantee program, and 50,000. I yield him another minute, please.
Gentleman's yield another minute.
Another 2 minutes.
Another 2 minutes.
And so we are seeing that this program actually works. I mean, if there was some question about this, if it hadn't worked, it wasn't getting, but it's creating jobs, and it will create jobs in the future.
Mr. Dixon.
And there is a whole bunch of people in there making applications from many of these states that you and I just talked about.
Right. We have 10 pending, and I would not be on the floor if I did not believe we maintained and created jobs, and we have potentially 10,000 more jobs than we can create.
With this $1 billion.
With the $1.5 billion that is pending. And I would point out again, I would broaden your observation to the entire United States of America. I mentioned 2 problems we face. The second is manufacturing in the United States of America. In 1977, we had over 18 million Americans engaged in manufacturing. Last year we had over 11 million. The real hourly wage for what an American worker is paid for 1 hour's worth of their physical labor, whatever they may do in this country, is 53 cents less in 2010 than it was in 1977. That's not the country I want to leave the children of this world, and I'm convinced it's because of the loss of those manufacturing jobs. If it's good enough to declare an emergency and build a children's hospital in Basra, Iraq, we ought not to take money out of an investment account that creates jobs in the auto industry to help people in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. If it is good enough to declare an emergency to have generators installed in Kandahar, Afghanistan by the Army Corps of Engineers, we ought not to take money away from job-creating programs to help people in Springfield, Massachusetts. If it's good enough to build a hydroelectric dam in Afghanistan on an emergency basis, we ought to declare an emergency to help people in Smithfield, Mississippi.
I ask for one additional minute. I yield it to the gentleman.
And I think I have made my point. I think the gentleman has. And I think this is the wrong policy. And again, institutionally, we need to come to grips with natural disasters, set those monies aside, but in the alternative and in the intermediate term, we need to recognize them for what they are and not to rob the future of this nation economically to do so, and I would be happy to yield back my time.
Well, he yields back the remainder of his time. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Subcommittee on Foreign Operations of Appropriations, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Granger.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Ms. Speaker, I rise today in support of this bill to fund the continuing operations of the federal government until November the 18th. I appreciate the leadership of Chairman Rogers in addressing the responsibilities of this Congress. Passing this stopgap measure will give Congress time to complete the fiscal year 2012 appropriations process. In spite of our late start, the Appropriations Committee was still able to move 11 of the 12 appropriations bills this year. However, the committee still needs time to collaborate with the Senate. The continuing resolution funds vital government programs and services and allows essential bills to be paid. It reduces spending to the levels agreed to by the Congress and the administration in the Budget Control Act that was signed into law in August. And it avoids controversial policy riders in order to ensure swift passage. There are many reasons members should support this bill. Perhaps one of the most important is what this bill does for our military. Without a CR, our service members and their families don't get paid. They would have to continue to do their work protecting the country, but they would have to do it while worrying about whether they'd be able to pay their bills or mortgage. Our brave men and women in uniform already faced that possibility earlier this year. They deserve better. They need to know that the United States Congress stands behind them. This bill addresses disaster relief and funds it in a responsible way. I urge my colleagues to support this bill so it can be enacted as soon as possible and the Appropriations Committee can complete its work without any further delay. This is a responsible action for us to take to go forward. The American people expect the Congress to do our jobs. The Appropriations Committee must complete its work. I yield back my time.